So I'm Jackson, I'm from Modal Electronics. We're here showing off our new synthesizer, Argon8. It is a polyphonic wavetable synthesizer, but there is way more to it than that. It's a really simple explanation, but happy to dive in with you and show you through what it's capable of and some of the patches that we've got ready to show at the moment. So as it works, we have some bamboo end cheeks at the moment. We've got this anodized steel top plate here. It's a steel chassis, so it's really rugged. We've got some really good connectivity on the back. We've got MIDI over USB or full-size MIDI. We have line outs, headphone out, clock sync in and out, and sustain and expression inputs. Moving on to like the synthesis architecture, we basically have, I mean, as a wavetable synthesizer, what you would expect, you know, these morphable wavetables, but we have a whole load of wave banks to choose from. Some which lean on old technology from us, from the 00 series, the 002, which was another wavetable synthesizer that we did back in the early 2010s. So we've imported a lot of the wavetables into here and ganged them around the dial so that we can now morph through them. But we have some really nice tech that is kind of new to some of the products that we have from the past, which is Sculpt Synthesizer, a small 4-voice portable, and then Craft Synth 2.0, which is a monophonic wavetable synth. We've kind of taken some of the technology that we developed for those and kind of amplified them into something that's a little bit more high-end for this. So we have oscillator modifiers in the oscillator section here. Once we've chosen all of the wave banks and the shapes that we want, and we've got the mix that we want, we can further modify the sound with an oscillator modifier. There's 8 in here that we can dial in the amount, which is traditional things like phase modulation, ring modulation, some shapers, things that people will be familiar with, and obviously you can modulate all of that stuff. And then we come on to something which is new for us, a first in this product, where we go into the actual oscillator section here, and we have these wave mods. These are static processes that are applied after the fact. Once we've made all of these decisions, we have a static process that's applied, and they all work in different ways. Some of them are squashing the waveform, some of them are kind of inverting the waveform. You know, there's different types of sync that's in there as well. It's a really interesting thing when you start to think about the amount of different combinations between all kind of 3 of those aspects. You know, the tuning and the shape of the wave, the amount of modulation, and how that itself is modulated. You know, whether that's with an envelope or with an LFO, and then again how we apply a process after that to each wave to completely change the sound again. Not all of that is happening before we hit the filter, so it's quite incredible in terms of possibility for sound design. It's mind-boggling. You know, you could spend a day or two just going through all those combinations to try and figure out which ones work best together, and you know how they actually detail the sound. It's really incredible. Moving on, just quickly to give you the rest of the architecture before we come in and listen to some patches. We've got a 2-pole state variable filter. Based on the same or a similar circuit that we use for the Craft Synth and for Sculpt, but we kind of had to modify it a little bit because the oscillators here are much higher resolution, so the gain staging had to be kind of adjusted a little bit. But it's a traditional state variable filter. We can sweep through in a low pass, and then we can continuously modulate into a band pass and up into a high pass, and all of that stuff can be moving at once, you know. All of it's modulatable. So a really nicely powerful filter. Moving on from here, we have all of our envelopes. So we have 3 envelopes here, one for the filter, one for the amp, and one for the modulation. We can kind of assign those multiple times, so the mod envelope can basically control a whole bunch of different stuff all at once. And then we have an effects section here. We have 3 slots. How this will work is we'll have a slot for delay, we'll have a slot for modulation-based effects, then we'll have a slot for reverb. So you'll have multiple different effects types available that you can choose from, dial in, modulate, and you know, bring in as part of the patch. which is another staggeringly powerful part of the synthesizer when you start to think about bringing effects into the engine itself and how that actually can be used in terms of sound design. Yeah, very, very, very powerful. Lastly, we have an arpeggiator. It's a programmable arpeggiator. We can tie in rests, or we can program notes, or we can just have it in note order. There is a huge amount of different directions and modes to the arpeggiator over how many octaves it goes, whether it shuffles through the notes, whether it goes through them in note order, or there's a lot of different options there as well. And then at the end of the line is a real-time sequencer. It's a 512-step sequencer. So you have all of the nuances of your playing, but we can also quantize it on input, which basically, if you're a sloppy player, I certainly am, is a massive lifesaver. We could record the arpeggiator into the sequencer, turn the arpeggiator off, play pads underneath, have something going, and it also records animation. This is a huge, huge part of the synthesizer. Essentially, it listens to the first 4 parameters that we start to touch. I could record a sequence without any notes in it and just have some parameters changing over time and then just play on top of it, and the synth is just going to morph around as I'm playing, which is hugely, hugely powerful. Lastly, I guess, is the performance features. We've got an XY joystick. We can decouple the pitch bend from this and have anything on any of the 4 axes here. So you can use this as a pathfinder, lock it in place where you want, and play from there, and then unlock it. We also have access to things like sustain, and we can set all of our modulation routings from here and elsewhere as well. And then some nice performance functions like a transpose feature where I can hold the transpose and I press a note and it's going to go down by this amount. You can see the amount changing on the screen here. So if you want to have a look. So I go up 3, I go down 1, back up to 0. I mean, I could show you this in terms of a patch later on. We can also capture chords. We have a very powerful spread function, which I'll show you when we come to the patches as well, which we can detune the oscillators or reassign them to be actually in intervals, which is really, really crazy. Very, very nice feature. I think that just about covers it in terms of the synthesis engine. We can probably now come to do some patches, some nice virtual analog pads. Show you quickly through the spread function so you get an idea of how that can kind of affect the overall sound. So we have a traditional detune, and then afterwards we snap into the interval ratios. This can be really interesting if you leave it on something like fourths or fifths. When you think about music theory, if that's not really your thing, this can be really interesting in terms of just using 2 fingers, to get a chord. I'm hoping this is coming through because I can't actually hear what's going on with the speakers right now. And I can latch that as well and just have that down to 1 finger. Which is a really, really nice sort of function to have in terms of we can also independently tune these oscillators, but then to have this further function behind it to retune some of the oscillators here, because as it stands we have 4 oscillators per voice, which enables us to do this kind of stuff. So the ability to retune those and reassign their tuning outside of kind of this oscillator section is, it's quite nice. arpeggiator going for this one. So we can program it. And we could also tie in rest, so you can change the divisions and the swing of all of this stuff. So the arpeggiator is like quite a powerful one in terms of sequencing stuff as well as just straight up arpeggiation. You can think of it much like a 32-step sequencer as well as an arpeggiator, which is quite nice. At the moment, we are still ironing out some of the firmware. We've got a couple of tweaks that we need to make in terms of the actual manufacturing process. So we want to change the color of this top plate. I mean, anodized steel top plates is quite hard to actually specify a Pantone and have it come back exactly the same. So we've got a few changes cosmetically. We have more effects that we have to implement at the moment. Otherwise, this is pretty much the shape of things to come from us. And we're looking probably for the next sort of 10 to 12 weeks that this will be available. So yeah, it's kind of a watch this space at this moment.